Here's John. Well, good evening.
How professional.
That was a pre-recorded introduction. I bet you didn't believe that. Welcome this evening. It's my privilege to have a special guest, and I can tell some stories here. In my radio days, there were quite a few memorable interviews, and some of the most famous people, I did not have to do any preparation, any study, because I knew about their lives. For example, John Wooden, the Wizard of Westwood, coach of the UCLA Bruins. When I interviewed John Wooden, it was just great because I lived through those Walt Hazzard, Gail Goodrich years. And I had some great interviews, people that I remember, Dean Rusk, Secretary of State for President Kennedy and Johnson, people like that. But one of the people that I never got to interview on the radio is my guest tonight. He's the one who actually gave me my start, and I won't tell the whole story except to say I consider this man not only a friend, but the Dean of Christian Talk Radio. Let's welcome Rich Buhler. Rich has graciously agreed to join us tonight. He hails from Orange County. Talk show host, author, I know a lot about him. Cottonwood, Arizona.
How do you know about that?
You told me one day.
Oh, I did, okay.
And I have one of those memories. I don't forget too many things. Biola, should I say what year?
68.
68, going back a little bit of a ways. And before you got into Christian talk radio, in fact, in many ways created the genre, KFWB.
Right, KFWB and KNX.
And KNX News Radio. And he has what they call the pipes, the voice for radio. They tell me I have the face for radio. They told you that too?
I wanted to be the world's first mime on the radio.
You know, I tried interviewing those mimes. They were always a real downer. The albums didn't sell very well either.
I was the one who pioneered closed captioning for the radio.
I could tell so many stories. We go way back. There was a time where he was with KBRT, I was with KKLA, but we had a mutual enemy, and that was the secularism of Hollywood that was coming out with a film about Jesus, The Last Temptation of Christ. It was blasphemous. So I contacted Rich, and he graciously said, I'll use my resources. And he said, this isn't going to be just your radio station gig. I said, no, this is for the Lord. And we put together quite a party that day.
That was great. The voice was heard. Thousands of people.
We had about 25,000 people show up on a Thursday afternoon. That was August 11th, 1988. And we had some great people come out. Some who weren't Christians, but friends and supporters, like Dennis Prager, Rabbi Chaim Asa, people like that, who weren't necessarily believers in Christ, but yet were supportive. So we go way back, Rich, and it's just great to have you.
Thank you, John. It's good to see you. It's good to be here.
Now, how many books have you written? I know you had the one which I actually referred to last week, Love, No Strings.
Love, No Strings Attached. Basically 5. Mm-hmm.
The most recent being?
One that's not published yet. I just finished it. It's called The Stranger Who Belonged. It's the first autobiographical thing that I've written. It's not my autobiography. I don't think people are interested in my whole life. But one of the stories about me that a lot of people know is my adoption and my finding my birth parents. And I've put that into a book now, and I hope people will enjoy that.
I wasn't going to mention the adoption. I didn't know if that was sensitive, something you were public about, but so you're coming out with that in a book. Mm-hmm. Excellent.
Yeah, no, it's very, very much part of my story.
Now, we've been focusing the last 4 weeks, this is the last installment on the issue of life crisis, and they come in many ways, and of course a crisis can also be an opportunity, and if we look at things properly biblically, and tonight we heard quite a lot of teaching about how to stay connected and how to work through these issues. In the fairly recent past, you came up with a major health crisis. Tell us about that.
Well, I have terminal cancer. I was diagnosed 1.5 years ago with pancreatic cancer. And I have often said through the years that as our medical community has learned so much and has fought hard against certain cancers, the word cancer does not have to be the death sentence that it used to be. And for most people, it's not. Pancreatic cancer, unfortunately, is in the category of not being a good cancer to be able to treat. There are different kinds. I have the most aggressive kind. It is inoperable, and they basically have not offered me anything except chemotherapy. And the chemotherapy is buying some time. And you know what? It's done that very well. I was diagnosed a year and a half ago. And the mood amongst all of the people that were working with us was contact hospice and go ahead and sign up and get it ready because it could be 3 to 6 months. And so that's a year and a half ago. Fortunately, I was able to go into chemotherapy. At first, they didn't even offer me that because the tumor had created a crisis in my body that affected the liver and the kidneys. And unless the kidneys are strong, can't do chemotherapy. And that's why they didn't offer it to begin with. But I was able to get to the point where my kidneys and my liver recovered enough that I was able to go into chemotherapy. And the chemotherapy has been keeping me going for a year and a half. And I'm very grateful for that.
Praise the Lord for that.
Yeah.
As we were corresponding back and forth, you'd indicated that is it 1 week on with chemo, and usually you spend that time basically sapped of energy, laying on the floor.
I'm basically a couch potato. In fact, this is really the first good day I've had in a week and a half. So you got me on a good day. I have been very, very, very sluggish this week. But that, those of you who've been through chemotherapy, you know that story. And different chemotherapies have different effects, and they have different effects on different people. There's not a formula to it. The chemotherapy that I'm on, actually, in the scope of things, is not the worst chemotherapy to be going through. But it does have its impact, and I have good days and bad days, mostly depending on the chemotherapy. The cancer itself is not affecting me very much yet. The tumor is stable, but the chemotherapy has been really debilitating at times.
The only thing that has happened in my life that is even close to that was at age 30, I had a mole that I went in and had it removed, and they did a diagnosis, and I went in, the dermatologist called me in after he got back to pathology and said, come on in, sit down. I sat down, he looked at me and said, you have a 75% chance of living 5 years. You have malignant melanoma, stage 3. And I said, what? I'm 30 years old, and basically it's like, you have, flip a coin 4 times. One of those times, if you get it wrong, that's it. By the grace of God, surgery, you get that or you don't, you live or you die. With melanoma, usually no guesswork.
Right.
And I guess God had some other plans for me. We've been talking on the issue of life crisis. Many scriptures come to mind, and I think of the various crises we face. 2 Corinthians chapter 1, he's the God of all comfort. He'll comfort us, others, with the comfort he's shown us through the process of a crisis. Does that verse meant anything to you in this situation?
Oh, yes. You know what? That verse has meant a lot to me in my life. I'm very grateful for what God has invested in my life up to this point, because that's all making a difference now. And the comfort of God has been immediate and has been sustaining. I feel comfortable in his arms. My wife, Diane, is down here. Diane, you can wave to the radio audience. We have really been buoyed by his comfort through all of this. And I will say that we have experienced more comfort through our friends and family, through God's people, through total strangers than we've ever experienced in our lives.
Wow.
It's just been overwhelming.
And of course, it gives you an opportunity to put into practice things that you've probably preached on, taught on over the years so many times. Then when it hits home, it's like, perhaps without even seeing it, some ways God prepared you for this time.
Yeah, it's like the guy at the party that said, my hobby is skiing. I'd love to try it sometime. He was all ready to do it. But, one of the things that has been a big issue during all of this is the grace of God. A friend of mine, back when I was working for KFWB, KNX days, a friend of mine was a Christian, and I lived near one another. We would carpool into work, and one day we were driving, and I was complaining about something. I was upset about something that I thought should happen in my life and hadn't happened in my life, or something. I don't remember what the issue was, but I was complaining, and he patiently listened to me as we were driving. And when I was all done, he looked over at me and he said, Rich, he said, God is not in the habit of providing early. He's always on time. When we know scripturally that God gives grace in the times and to the people to whom it's needed. We have needed grace during this time for things that we have never faced before. You can think about it. You can try to think about it. We all try to imagine having a life-threatening illness or facing death. You think about that. But one of the things I've learned about life, John, is that no matter how much we think about it, we do not volunteer for the worst. I remember a friend of mine whose wife was dying of cancer for 7 years. You probably know him, Jim and Sally Conway, the midlife crisis people that had several books. When she died, finally, after 7 years of a very, very gruesome battle with cancer, it was easy for people to think, well, he's had 7 years to prepare for this. He's known that she's going to go, and so that'll be a little bit easier on him. And he even felt that way. He thought, well, this is better than it could have been. But it wasn't. When she died, he went into crisis like he had never known. And the reason was because we don't volunteer to go to the depths of ourselves that pain and crisis will take us. And you don't have to feel guilty about not going there either. Sometimes people say, well, I haven't thought that much about death. Maybe I should think more about death. Yes, I think we should, because heaven is our true home. We say that. It's hard to make that a reality, but we say that. But you don't have to feel bad if you haven't gone through the emotions of somebody who's lost a child in death or whatever the crisis might be, because you're not going to feel that until you get there. But when you get there, God's grace is there.
I remember years ago I interviewed Paul Gann, and Paul Gann with Howard Jarvis, they were two of the people responsible for trying to keep taxes down in California. Paul Gann had an operation, went through a blood transfusion at the time when you couldn't screen for HIV because it was politically incorrect to say that homosexuals were most often carrying HIV. He received the virus through the transfusion. And I remember talking to him about that. He broke down crying, not because he was dying, because he was going to leave his wife behind.
Yes.
Now, you've got a good family support. How many kids? 8?
7.
7. I added 1.
Between us, our combined family, we have 10 children.
10 children. So you've got a great support group there, but what about that with respect to what Paul Gann said? Isn't it your bigger concern that my family,
yes,
they're going to be taken care of?
Yeah.
That's where you turn.
Yeah. That really is what and I'm thankful. I'll never forget one time somebody, I think it was on the radio, called cancer the gift of time. And I thought, well, people who are in crisis sometimes say things that are kind of schmaltzy, and you think, well, they're just trying to make things sound better and so forth. And I didn't react very well to that phrase, the gift of time. But it is true, and many of you here have experienced it. Cancer gives you the gift of time. Instead of falling over dead of a heart attack, I have been given forewarning that I have a life-threatening illness, and it's more than life-threatening. They are classing it as terminal. I'm not, by the way, completely buying into that yet. I believe in God's sustaining power, and I believe in God's healing power. Amen. And I will be very receptive to that happening. And I believe He sustained me for this year and a half. I think I'm already living in a miracle. But cancer is the gift of time. I've had the gift, and I'm telling you, it has been a gift. This year and a half has been, don't let me gloss it over. It's been hard. It's been gruesome. It's been dark. It's been difficult. It's been all the things you can imagine. But it has also been one of the most precious gifts I've ever been given, because it turned my attention toward eternity in more of a way than I would have. It has prompted me to make sure that I do things with my family, that I do things with my wife, that I say things to my friends that I want to say, that I sort of, it's not, I haven't really put together a bucket list. I don't have that much time to travel. But it has been the gift, and the greatest gift has been, as I said, we don't volunteer to go to the deepest parts of our lives. We don't volunteer to go there. C.S. Lewis said, pain is God's megaphone. And that's why we don't want to waste pain. I don't think we need to glorify it. I don't think we need to want it. I don't think we need to look for it. I don't think we need to create it. But God redeems that and uses it to do things in our lives, probably at the depths that we've been praying for. You know, on one hand, we might be over here saying, God, please do this magnificent thing in my heart, in my life. And over here, God is bringing the pain or allowing the pain or going to redeem the pain that has occurred, even if the enemy's brought it on, to do that. And it's hard for us to put those two things together, but they really do. And so it's been one of the most precious seasons of time of my entire life. And I don't know whether this is my final chapter or whether it's just the next chapter and the final chapter is to come at some later season of my life. But I'm grateful for it. I'm very grateful for it.
A couple more things quickly, then we'll see if we have some emails that have come in and texts where people have comments. Have you been amazed at the outpouring of love from people probably you didn't even knew you existed? I heard about your situation from a friend who heard about it up in the state of Washington. I had no idea. And it made the rounds because people that know Rich Buhler and how much he's meant to so many, especially in Southern California community, that have heard about this, you know that they're out there praying for you. I bet you've had cards, things beyond your imagination.
It has been overwhelming. You know, John, you've done a lot of radio. You ask God to use you the best you can. When you're on the inside, when you're sitting behind the microphone like John and I have, it's our job, it's our ministry, we get up and do it the best we can, just like you get up and go do your job the best you can. The fact that it is something that public only kind of hits you every now and again when something special happens or something out of the ordinary. And so I've appreciated people's response to our ministry through the years and have been gratified with that. I had no concept. Of what the breadth of it was, except through this, the outpouring of love, the people who wanted to say, quick, before Rich dies, I want to tell him how much his program meant to me, you know, and people calling and people sending notes and people who want to give me recommendations as to how to fight cancer and so forth. Some of them are kind of cockeyed, but it's coming from hearts. It's coming from hearts that are concerned and have love. And yes, frankly, it's been overwhelming, John. It's been overwhelming. It's kind of wrecked my life because, you know, you kind of get used to where you are. You kind of get comfortable to where you are. You know, there's certain things you're good at, certain things you're not good at. You're either you know on the good-looking end of the scale or the not good-looking end of the scale, or the intellectual side or the non-intellectual. You get comfortable with where you're at in your little village. When you start getting all this stuff, it just messes your mind up. And I honestly, I told somebody that you know I was still recovering from all of that, but that has been very, very nourishing.
And you just hung up the microphone at KBRT, just a couple of months ago?
2 months ago.
So you actually were broadcasting up until November?
I took about 6 months off, was it, Diane? About 6 months while they were thinking that I wasn't going to make it, and then I bounced back, thanks largely to the chemo. And so I went back on the air for 7 months.
Wow.
And I'm still with KBRT. I'm still doing off-the-air live. I'm not doing live things. I'm recording commentaries and doing other work for them. But I had to give up the live talk show because I never knew when the good days and the bad days were going to come.
Right, indeed. Tricia, what do we have?
Well, yeah. Well, I don't want to take too much time, but I relate immensely to your story. My mother had lung cancer, and unfortunately, she lived the miracle too. It was just amazing the strength that she found and gave to all of us through that experience. She had stage 4 lung cancer. She was given 2 months. She too, 1.5 years, and that 1.5 years was the most blessed year of her life. I had just had my first, and it was the most blessed year of her life. And in that year, of the whole time I've known her, I think I had gained more strength from her experience and from her faith and from her love and from her positive attitude. And it just shined on so many people that didn't even know her. And it's just amazing how God can use something like this change the lives of everyone around you that you don't even know. I mean, there was a junior high soccer team that raised money for her cancer treatment that helped keep her
Wow.
her mushroom, reishi mushroom treatment, that kept her going for that extra year and a half. $700 a month that we didn't have. People were bringing in that I didn't even know to support. And she was just sharing the love of God with everybody, and she made such an impact. So God bless you, and I know you are doing that too, sir.
Hallelujah.
And your wife, bless you. Sorry, that was just, I just had to relate.
Oh, that's great, Tricia.
Been there, and
Thanks.
it's just,
Have
I'm
a
a
comment
stronger
or a-
person.
A question there for Rich?
Yes,
or a comment?
absolutely. We have a couple of them for you, actually. One of them was, there have been some dark days that I'm sure you have gone through, and how has your faith brought you through those? I'm just going to combine some of these so you can kind of touch on them. They're all kind of around the same topic. What would you say to those who are losing a loved one? What do you say to those who are dying? And what lessons have you learned through some of the suffering, maybe physically, emotionally, that you have been through?
Excellent.
Well, let's take a break, and we'll be here till 11.
I know. Sorry, I had to wrap those all up.
No. That's because these are all huge topics. You know what? I have to say, in terms of my own faith through this, one thing is that when I was a pastor for a season of time, and I did a teaching from the Gospels, and for some reason during that time of teaching, it really hit me what it meant when Jesus, how important it is in the kingdom that we live one day at a time. You know, the Lord's Prayer is, give us this day our daily bread. And Jesus talked about not being too concerned about tomorrow because today's got enough trouble of its own. And somehow that struck me, and I haven't been perfect at it. I wouldn't hold myself up as a model of it. But I have consciously lived for 30 years, one day at a time, not knowing whether the next day was going to be here or not. And this has just been a more intense season of the same thing, of not knowing what's going to happen tomorrow. That has really been important. The other is what I already mentioned. God has given grace that I didn't ever have before. He's given me grace. He's given me strength. He's given me a sense of His faithfulness that I can rest in. And that's where I can go. I mean, where am I going to go? This is too big. It's been very weird to have an illness that we're not working toward recovery from. I mean, we spend our whole lives going to the doctor and getting well from things, you know. You have your surgery, or you have your treatments, or you take your medicines, or you wait your recovery time. Nobody is offering me a recovery from this. And it's too big for me to put into anybody else's hands, but God's hands. It's just too big to put in anybody else's hands but God's hands. But I trust Him. I trust Him. I don't think He's given me an illness to punish me for anything. I think I'm living in a fallen world where cancer happens. As a matter of fact, I qualify for where I was in Cottonwood. You mentioned Cottonwood, Arizona, which is where I was born. I grew up in the Cottonwood, Sedona area. There are many of us from that area that have developed cancers, so many that the government stopped entertaining lawsuits or class actions and started granting money. And I'm one of those. It was because of living downwind from the nuclear testing in Nevada. One of the correlations between pancreatic cancer, one of the correlations with pancreatic cancer is radiation. And so, you know, if you live in a sewer, you're going to get germs, and if you have germs, you're going to get sick. And we lived in a kind of a nuclear sewer, and a lot of us got sick. In fact, I've been corresponding with a friend whose mom just died from the same stuff. So I just feel comfy in God's arms. I really do. And I'm not afraid to go. I'm concerned about how it happens. You know, it's like the comedian said, I don't mind the thought of dying. I just don't want to be there when it happens.
That's right.
And I got to give you the greatest line of this whole year and a half. You were talking about your mom, or no, you were talking about your melanoma. Diane's brother has had melanoma twice, very, very serious, and God has delivered him from it. But he had a friend who was dying of cancer, and one of his friends walked up to this guy and said, "How does it feel knowing you're going to die?" And the guy looked back at him and says, "How does it feel pretending you're not?" I've always looked at people with terminal cancer as those poor people over there. But you know what? I don't feel like one of those poor people over there. I am one of us. We are all going to face the transition to heaven. And God willing, we're going to face it with Jesus so that we can go to heaven. I feel a part of a company of people. It's just that maybe my timing will be a little bit sooner, a little bit different. I really am okay. I really am okay.
I want to be sensitive of time, especially because, we got Rich out here and want to get him back, and we don't want to wear him out here.
Want me to fall over on the table? Actually, no, I'm having a very good day. I really am.
Good. I'm glad for that. But a couple more things that I'm sure that in your life you had many, many accolades. In fact, I remember seeing you with your first book when you were on the Hour of Power, and Schuller had you on, and I was actually watching that show. I don't know if I was checking out his theology that day or not. But Biola University granted Rich an honorary doctorate, many, many accolades, but isn't the one you're really looking forward to? Well done, good and faithful servant.
Amen. And to take all those things and put them at his feet. Put them at his feet. I've really been taking stock of my life. I haven't had much else to do when I'm in chemotherapy. You kind of sit there and stare at the wall. But I'm taking stock of my life. I don't have any major projects ahead to work on. I don't have a new company to build or a new show to do. And I say with absolute heartfelt sincerity, God has led every step of my life, and He's redeemed the missteps that I've made. And I'm in this state of saying, God, thank you. You know, if I don't have any more time, I'm okay. The only thing I want is I want more time with my precious wife. I've got a grandchild on the way. That'll be number 13. And you know, there's never a convenient time to go. There's always something on the calendar. There's a wedding coming up or a birth or something. You know, there's not a day when you call up all your friends and family and say, okay, clear the calendar, I'm going. But even that's up to God. That's in God's timing. That's in God's timing. And I truthfully, honestly give God the glory for anything good that's happened. I can tell you the day that changed my life. It was January 23rd, 1973. I was in secular radio. I was working for CBS. And I was a Christian. I had gone through a powerful spiritual renewal. But I had been praying to be empowered for the power of the Holy Spirit. And on January 23rd, 1973, that's when I got ignited. And I have not been unignited ever since that day. And the good things that happened started happening as a result of that experience. And so I can't claim credit for it.
Praise the Lord. This is the fourth installment of a four-part series as we move on to something new next week on the issue of crisis. And I just couldn't think of a more appropriate person, and my privilege and honor, Rich, to be able to interview you. Like I said, I've interviewed...
I want you to know how much it means to me that when you think of crisis, you think of Rich Buhler. What a heritage I've left with God.
In fact, we could tell so many stories. The early KBRT days, and I know you've told it before, and I can't remember exactly, but when women would call in, they didn't want to use their name, so they started using the name George. Then every woman would call in and say, "This is George."
Yeah. Well, people, when they call talk radio, especially if it's on a sensitive issue, frequently don't use their real name anyway. But there was, I guess, some woman called in that was, her conscience wouldn't let her lie and use a false name, so she used an obvious pseudonym, George, and that's what got it started. It went on forever. And one time, I remember a guest came in and told me, he said, "You know, I've been listening to your show, Rich, and that gal named George has a lot of problems.
Well, and I always appreciated the opportunity. You were gone occasionally. My brother Don, who had written some books, would guest host for
Yes.
you. And then it was about that time Walter Martin was doing a 1-hour-a-week show, Let's Talk About the Bible, and jumped over to that other fine Christian station.
Yep.
And you needed to find somebody for that slot. And there was this guy, Harold Lindsell, editor emeritus of Christianity
Yes.
Today, who was available. And I think he tried out a couple of times. Great mind, but I don't think he had the radio presence.
Not for radio. Mm-mm.
And somehow I got the gig, and then ended up, Rich gave me a Sunday afternoon show, and then the Bible Answer Man got me in from there, and so that was kind of the beginning.
Yeah.
So good or bad, you got me launched,
No, that's good.
and always appreciated it.
Distinguished career.
And like I say, to have an opportunity then to interview Rich here at the church.
Thank you.
And something where you can just minister to the folks, we really appreciate it. Let's have a hand for Rich Buhler.
Thank you.